Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Scary Stories by the Campfire. We are your counselors tonight. My name is Jeremy,
I'm Jason.
and
Rick.
I was gonna say, and today we are joined with Mr. Rick Heinz for a
Yay!
very great episode of The Exorcist.
Yeah, we're talking about The Exorcist tonight, and I'm gonna be honest with you. I watched this like last night, and I actually watched it with Raven. She'll be popping up in the chat here in a little bit. But why pick this movie? Because we actually let Rick here pick the movie for tonight. So we went off of his suggestion, which I think we were going to get to The Exorcist at some point. Anyway, because it, like he said, it's a classic. This is like the epitome of like what horror is. And yeah, so why particularly this one?
So, those of you who do not know me, I happen to be a writer. I write all kinds of things, whether it be sarcastic fiction about the end of the world, Dungeons and Dragons, Geek and Sundry, game books, all kinds of things. But I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and like most people who write about demons and magic and the occult, I went to Catholic school. So when I was a very, very young kid, I was told that and it's been this movie The Exorcist was banned in our household, right? My mom was petrified of it because her grandmother said that, or her mom said that if she watched this movie and continued her ways, she would end up being possessed like the girl in that. And my mom was petrified about The Exorcist, would ban this movie from coming into the house at all occasions. And somehow I managed to get my hands on a copy of the VHS, and I watched this movie literally terrify myself at like probably age like 9. But I was fascinated by Catholic occultism after that point. Something in it just stuck. And to this day, any movie with ghost stories or possession and like that sort of like religious bent to it, I will hide underneath the blankets. I will, keep the lights on. I will get all of the heebie jeebies and spookies. And there is I could watch that film at any point in the year and I will scare myself endless, and I love it. But it inspired and fueled a lot of my uh, sort of desire to dive deeper into, myths, the occult, demons, ancient legends. I ended up going to college to be a minor in theology at some point, and picking up like a lot of weird stuff about world religions and their origins, their demons, their dark sides. And it's basically endless writing fuel. I mean, my main book series that I use deals heavily with demonics and what happens when we bring them back into modern world. And now we have things like guns, and people are sometimes way worse than the creatures of actual legend that think that they would have power in today's world. Maybe they do.
Hmm.
That's up to the novel series to let the reader figure out where it goes. But um, that's why I picked The Exorcist, because I think that there's no more critical movie for me on the south side of Chicago, raised in South Side Catholic, to go completely to the other spectrum throughout my life's journey, and then I sit on down and start writing, and all of this like occult theology starts just spewing out of me on like the keyboard, and I'm like, wonder why I'm so twisted. Oh yeah, probably because I grew up watching horror movies as a young kid, and there are some of them like I never got into like sort of gore porn or like the torture porn, as it
Yeah.
were, type of horror movies. I always gravitated more towards either like the demonic, the religious, or like that mental, possession style with ghosts and sad stories that would just creep me out. Um, so that's why I picked The Exorcist.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's a really good movie. This was actually when I watched it um last night. Um, I had seen bits and pieces of it, and I heard people talk about it, and I don't know if it's just me because now we've become um since we started doing this podcast, we've been watching more and more and more horror films. I don't know if I'm slowly becoming desensitized. This movie wasn't like the most frightening thing. I mean, there were some really creepy instant scenes that happened. I think there was like one instance where like the everyone knows like the head turning scene, right, which completely revolves her head. It is an iconic scene, but the first time she actually does is where she's like sitting on the bed and she's got like the back to the audience or whatever, and then she just kind of and she snaps her head like just completely around. It's just off-putting the way it looks that I'm sitting there going, "Ugh, that is that is just creepy," you know.
So usually the scene that gets people or offends people the most is the scene with the cross and
Hmm.
an immense amount of vulgarity.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Depending on where your podcast is at on the spectrum, if you've seen the movie, you know where I'm talking about. But do you guys know? Um, I don't know how familiar are you guys with Satanic Panic?
Um,
I'm not familiar with it much.
no.
I've heard the
Okay,
term, but that's it.
so this is actually like hyper relevant to the film. A lot of what is terrifying about the film is the generation and the time that the film came out.
Hmm.
It was Patricia Riggs started an organization called BAD, and like BADD, and it was basically this entire cabal of Christians that were against anything that was like Ozzy Osbourne, metal, demonic possession, or demons, Dungeons and Dragons,
Hmm.
and Satanic Panic was a real thing that was almost born from a film like The Exorcist that had come out a few years prior. Consorting with the dark and the devil and whatnot. Dr. Demento eventually ran a whole podcast that was like a twisted parody of it, which was like a heyday to us ancient geeks. Um, but the culture there was a time when just by wearing a white zombie T-shirt, Rob Zombie's, predecessor, former band, would get cops to stop you on the street and hand you pamphlets about how you are going to hell. The fact that I had an advanced Dungeons and Dragons book when I was in grade school uh, got me sent to the counselor's office. The parents pulled in and everything like that because I was summoning demons.
Hmm.
And there was this legitimate fear and sort of modern day witch hunt around anybody who was engaging in heavy metal music, these elements. And to this day you can still find evangelicals in the Westboro and super hardcore extremists going out there and campaigning against you know even geek culture, going to conventions. I mean, if you've ever been to San Diego Comic Con or any or even most Comic Cons these days, Pensacon, whatnot, you'll
Hmm.
find a group of protesters standing across from the convention, basically telling everybody that's in there, you're all going to hell.
Hmm.
And this element of satanic panic also bled through society. And then The Exorcist, and along with the movie Poltergeist, at the time, both had incredibly tragic accidents happen to almost everybody in the cast after filming those movies. To the point of multiple deaths, they say curses, other elements like that. And this sort of bled out into the ethos of society and sort of that mind think that made the movies far more terrifying than what was actually on there. And then you have real life, like you have the actual Catholic Church, particularly Saint Bernardine, or sorry, Cardinal Bernardine up here in Chicago at the Holy Mary Cathedral, using it as part of their sermons and talking about that this is something that will happen to you and the testament of the devil and how prolific he is in, corrupting your lives. Unfortunately, it had the wrong message on me because I kind of went the exact opposite way. And I was like, all right, let's go. Trench coats, let me listen to all this other stuff. And, you know, I zinged in the opposite direction, started really questioning, like, hey, wait a minute. If all of these things are true and these elements are there, then this is the person who gave all of mankind the seed of knowledge and awareness and consciousness. And like, I started going down a completely different track, which got me heavily into theology. And I found out as I expanded my horizons, it's fascinating the way that different cultures around the world handle the concept of light and dark. Not everything is the ancient, or sorry, not ancient, the old like fire and brimstone. God's gonna hold you like a spider on a thread over a dangling inferno that is the pits of hell. Sometimes the darkness and other whatnot is just another side of your existence. But what's terrifying about The Exorcist in outside of the movie is what happened in society around it and what happened to the film members themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So the movie carries a larger gravitas, I think, um, than just the film itself.
Absolutely.
Plus, it's oh yeah, good.
Oh no, I was gonna say it's cool that you brought that up because Warner Brothers actually had to hire bodyguards to protect Linda Blair for 6 months after the film was released due to religious zealots believed that it glorified Satan. So for 6 months she had bodyguards following her everywhere she went.
Yep.
Wow.
That because that and yeah, I don't think she like ever got over the fact that that scene with the cross and the things that she did as an actress in that movie. Um, like oh man, she was hated forever
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, I heard there was a lot of negativity towards that, but yeah, when I was watching it, the the scariest thing, at least for me, throughout this whole thing was, well, they had the scene where, it's weird because I'm into all these horror movies and whatnot, but in a lot of these movies that we watch, especially like slasher films, there's a lot of gore and blood and stuff like that, and it doesn't ever really bother me. But when they were doing that medical procedure where they were like sticking the needles and stuff into her neck and whatnot, and the blood spraying out, I'm just like, this is by far probably the worst part and the most uncomfortable to sit through. But when you're watching the movie and these things start happening, and they take her to the doctor, and the doctor's like, oh, it's front lobe brain thing she's got going on. Then they go in and test her and they don't find anything, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to take her to a psychiatrist or whatever. And then that happens, and then they're like, okay, we're going to just, you might need a priest because there's something else there. And then the priest is like, yeah, you probably just need to go talk to a doctor or a psychiatrist. And it's just, that's kind of frightening when you have a problem and no one's sure how to fix the problem. That for me is like one of the more frightening things about the movie, was that there was just kind of this we don't know what's wrong.
So
And
that's actually you mentioned the priest, and that's
Mhm.
actually a fantastic thing to talk about because in The Exorcist, the priest does not start off as a believer in that possession and the devil is actually here, right? He starts
No.
off like, oh, go to a psychologist, go to
Yep.
these things, and throughout the movie, his faith is actually what's getting tested um, as he starts realizing more and more that this is what's going to happen to him. In a lot of later horror movies, usually the priests or the people that are there already come with that emboldened sense of faith. But I think it actually is like a better character study because he doesn't have that, and he grows throughout the film to try to serve as the bulwark to save the girl.
No, that makes sense. So I had a question about this movie. I don't know if I just missed a detail, or have you seen like the later movies?
Oh yeah, I've watched Exorcism of Emily Rose, all
Oh.
the other things. It's full 9 yards. Trust me, I have literally hidden in my couch under a blanket or behind somebody, even though I'm a 6'1" like giant person. Um, I vividly remember even the later one still got me.
Now, did you read the book?
No,
No.
and there's a reason why on that
All right. Well, I know like when the movie starts off, they got the dig in, I believe it was Iraq, and he found the little uh Pazuzu little, I guess it was like a little sculpture or whatever.
one. Sure.
And I'm assuming that it was Pazuzu that was possessing Reagan in this movie, right? I could be
Uh,
wrong. I mean, I don't think they ever specified specifically.
which devil it was or which demon it was.
Yeah.
Uh,
They
you know
didn't.
what? Actually,
They didn't say it, but they did give a glimpse of him during one of the lift scenes where Reagan was lifting off the bed. They did like a strobe effect, and you could see him, the statue in the background.
Yeah, I would go like I don't actually think they explicitly state that. I have to like I almost want to rewatch it to catch that detail myself now on whether or not it actually is like Mammon or Azrael or like the demon in
I
the statue.
I think when Reagan is possessed in the scene and she's or it's doing the talking or whatever, it does keep saying like we. I don't know
Yes.
if that's just
No. Yeah. That in that reference to we is baked into a lot of like fantasy and Legion and Beelzebub and like that swarm of entities that we are the host of hell, and that did spawn from that movie in terms of like. So I don't know. Are you guys familiar with a game called Vampire the Masquerade?
I've heard of it, I've never played it.
Okay,
Same.
there's a whole infernal element in that game that characters can explore and undertake, and usually it sort of references everything almost as if the writers were basically directly inspired from The Exorcist and the subsequent line films. So, but it's that reference to we and like we are legion. It's a biblical thing. It's actually in there. There's some pretty apocalyptic and dark quotes later on about the host of hell and how they represent and how they will manifest in the earth.
It's
And
interesting.
I just remembered that right around the time The Exorcist came out and The Poltergeist had come out, this is counter to Nightmare on Elm Street and what's the other one with Jason?
Friday the
Friday
13th.
the
Friday the 13th. It's counter to them, but there was another movie that had come out that it was categorized under a different genre, but it was called uh, The Signs, and it was about the seven seals breaking and the actual like biblical apocalypse coming to the earth. And so you have, I think, in like the 6 year period, a crap ton of religious apocalyptic movies um, crammed into these. So it's no wonder the 80s were filled with satanic. The late 70s and 80s were
Yeah.
filled with satanic. Ozzy Osbourne goes on stage, bites the head off a bat, and the world goes into freaking tizzy after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just when we were watching it because they had the opening scene in Iraq and he found like the little statue, whatever, and then we go right into Reagan's possession, and the only real question I had was like, did this connect with the beginning, or is this something that's kind of explained later on down the line? It was just like I don't know if it was like he unearthed this idol and that's kind of what got things started. Did the idol end up in her house somewhere?
I know it's out there, and one thing I've never been able to bring myself to go hunt down and watch is like I want to know what made it to the cutting room floor. Like, what footage did they decide to chop out, right?
Oh
Because
yeah.
uh, movies weren't allowed to be a certain length at that time because of like actual film reels and stuff.
Hmm.
So there is a lot that was filmed that didn't make it, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to what happened to it. It's got to be out there somewhere, or they burned it. One of the two.
Yeah,
They
I
probably
mean,
burned it. I'm going
no,
with that one.
That's what I would do. When your cast members start getting cursed and bad events and tragedies start happening to people at that point, you just go ring, just burn everything.
yeah, I mean, I was aware of like when you brought up Poltergeist and you're talking about like all the tragedies and stuff that revolved around the actual real life actors and stuff of that film. I actually started looking into this one a little bit and I was finding kind of the same parallel stuff. They had like from what I read, the woman who played the name just flew through my head. The main priest, like his mom who died in the movie, who
Yep.
passed in the movie.
Yeah, Father
Apparently,
Karras.
right after she had finished filming and got all her stuff done, she pretty much passed the same way, which I thought was really relatively interesting. It was just kind of like the exact same way.
Yeah. So
Um,
even you are like hooked with that. Like, ooh, now you start finding and peeling back more
mm-hmm.
stories that lend to it in real life, and um, it it gets kind of it gets kind of fun to go research. Now imagine you didn't have access to the internet at the time that this came out because it wasn't invented. And so you're getting your research on this by hearsay, rumors, library newspaper clippings, and reports. And you can't just go click around and find this stuff. When you hear these tales, there's almost an expanded like universe that comes
Mm-hmm.
with it because it's word of mouth and or like a printed media that only gives you that context with no more sense of clicking or the ability to dive deeper. So your only way to go do it is start researching occult legends and cases of demonic possession. Does the Catholic
Yep.
Church actually have a secret arm? So
That's crazy.
um,
Interesting. No.
So
Uh.
one thing that I was reading, Mercedes McCambridge, she did the voice for the demon side of Reagan, um, and it, she insisted on swallowing raw eggs and chain smoking to alter her vocalizations, and then was going through sobriety because of past alcohol abuse, but would take shots of whiskey because she knew it would add to the manic effect. And then she had him strap her to a chair to give the restraint scenes more realism, and had to have
and
a priest there to help her counsel her afterwards so she wouldn't fall back off the wagon of sobriety.
Well, that's extreme.
And everybody who's listening, this is why voice actors are awesome and do not get the credit they deserve. Um, like that kind of story is freaking crazy. The amount of voice actor stories
Mm-hmm.
that I know and what they actually go through. Um, I mean, there's a reason you see writers and voice actors at conventions. We're always behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
and but like that's crazy.
It is like
Yeah.
when I read that, I was like, the things that it took to make movies back then compared to like movies nowadays. And something I'm very big on, and Jason knows this, is I like practical effects over CGI, especially in newer movies. I love practical effects. I always have.
Oh,
And
same.
that's one of the things that I loved about this movie was all the practical effects. And in fact, when I haven't seen this movie in years, this is the first time I've watched it in years, but you can see where like movies like The Evil Dead took inspiration from these practical effects and incorporated them into their movie because they look very similar.
Well, so I think just as a movie genre, and I know it's a wild thesis, and my one of my like main co-writers I work with, Pat Edwards, he does a lot of like ancient deep dives into like movies and film and directions on like some other podcasts and stuff. So I'm actually going to pick his brain on this, but from everything I've seen, horror, even to this day, is one of the few genres of film that rely more heavily on practical effects, plot, props than CG. Mostly not a budget because you could slap together a horror movie in the 80s with practical effects and special parts for 10, $20,000
Mm-hmm.
and go make 300,000, 400,000, or even $1 million. And the profit margin on them was huge for the studios, compared to a big blockbuster one that was starting to like try to use the new uh, sort of the newer elements and the like the foundation of early CG. Um, Even though they have a higher price tag, the cost to make them was right there. So studios were cranking out uh, these elements, and when you had props made for one horror movie, if you watch a bunch of horror movies from the same genre together, you'll see the same props
Yeah.
all because they made it once. They're just going to reuse it, which is where you get some of the fun and camp in, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you need a decapitated head, well, we got 20 in the back storehouse, so let's just grab this one.
Yeah.
Did
Um,
they? Didn't I see that head before? That the head didn't belong to that guy.
yeah, right. Uh, one of my good friends, Brandon Borgman, he actually makes special effects props for modern day films, and um, him and these guys over at HDC Cosplay and stuff like that, they have a blast doing it, but their eyes light up when they get a horror contract because they get to do incredibly crazy like gore effects and like
Mm-hmm.
weird body horror. Which body horror is a genre that I'm not into because it actually like creeps me out in like a very like visceral way. Um, but I still can't look away. It's so weird. Like I will like duck away from them and whatnot, but like I'll still watch it and then be like, I need to scrub my eyeballs for weeks.
It's funny that
Yeah,
you
I
brought
think
up money though, because 11 million is how much it estimated to cost to make the movie,
To make The Exorcist?
to make The Exorcist, but it grossed estimated 233 million just in the U.S. and Canada. So I
Well,
think they made their money back.
yeah, I would count that as a massive win.
yeah, I think a lot of the the stuff that was going on at the time with Warner Brothers and whatnot. I think I'd read that they were having some issues or something, but that didn't stop people from like lining up around the theater
uh,
and like in the dead of winter, they were lining around just to watch this movie. So
the controversy around it, the fact that they were doing it, the deadpan from like society and the backlash, feeds this sort of like viral ethos that you have to go see this film.
hmm
um, and it's true today, and it hasn't stopped. Right? You try to ban something, and that thing becomes a mega bestseller.
Yep.
So every author's dream is to make it on somebody's book banning list from a state government or a cultural organization, because now we're going to be an instant bestseller, and that's what we need to get lifted.
Oh, it's sad though that that's what it requires, but it's true. Like it's exactly that. Like people gravitate towards that. I'm not allowed to have it, or I'm not allowed to see it, or I'm not allowed to read it, so I'm gonna do it anyway.
I mean, even Harry Potter got blown up when it was because the same same organizations that were after Exorcist and role playing games were like, no, Harry Potter is teaching kids to be wizards and dabble in dark magics. Boom, J.K. Rowling's now J.K. Rowling.
Yep. So Rick, Raven has a question for you. Have you ever found a movie you refuse to watch based on the type of horror or subject matter?
Not a uh, not like a I refuse. Like I'll probably watch anything once. It's just more of a would I choose this movie over this movie? For the longest time, I think I refused to watch the Saw series. I was like, I am never watching this. This is just torture, gore, porn. There is no point. I'm gonna go watch The Purge and my like the others and my creepy ghost stories. Then one day I finally ran out of things to watch, and I actually sat down to watch a Saw movie, and I was like, oh, this is not what I thought. This is actually really good. And then I watched Saw 2, Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5, and whatever, and it was great. Because there's an overall actual
hmm
plot to the movies, and I was really freaking surprised. I was like, oh, this is why everybody's talking about it. Though actually, there is, I cannot remember the name of it, but I saw it on TikTok, and it's on Netflix, but it's a body horror film where somebody like sticks their hand in like a love scene into like somebody's like rib orifice, and it is like like just wrong, and the special effects on it are glorious. Props to the body. That thing went viral on TikTok. Everyone's just like, no. uh
was it an older movie?
no,
It was a newer movie.
I think it's still on Netflix. I mean, this was like during COVID,
Oh, okay.
so it was during our apocalypse. I refused to watch that movie because that one scene made me sick to my stomach. But I totally pulled up that movie, fast forwarded to that exact clip on TikTok to see if that was really a thing. It was, and I'm like, oh, okay, I cannot watch this one. That's gonna make me sick to my stomach.
Yeah, I mean, um, funny that you mentioned the Saw franchise because I was kind of the same way, especially with like Saw and Hostel and stuff like that, where the premise of the movie is just people getting tortured. I was just like, I don't get the appeal of it, and I actually watch on on YouTube, I watch the Kill Count on a
Oh
channel.
yeah, I know the kill count.
Yeah.
Uh,
So that was my first like actual experience with Saw. I'm like, oh my god, this is what Saw is? This whole I gotta check this out now because this is just so crazy, you know. So it's just interesting how things sometimes get advertised and they're like almost a completely different thing than you actually originally think.
Well, funny you mentioned that, and that's from a creator standpoint. One thing that usually happens once you publish your work, you go to like if you make a screenplay or something like that. Even when I have my own novels, the back of book text that you see on the novels and how sometimes it gets advertised from the publishers or the distributors is very different from the actual intent of the creators who made the films or the books. So that's that's because you run into that problem because they have marketing data on what they think will sell well, and
Hmm.
um, sometimes that's a train wreck.
So there were two actors that were originally supposed to play Father Marin and Father. I cannot pronounce his name. Karras,
Correct.
Karras. So Marlon Brando was originally wanted by the studio to play Father Marin, and I don't know if y'all know who Marlon Brando is.
Of course,
Yeah, like they immediately vetoed it because they said it would become a Brando movie, and that's it.
I could see that. I actually can't see Marlon Brando in that film without it just being
And
him.
and Jack Nicholson was supposed to play was up for the role of father. I'm sorry,
Jack Nicholson?
I can't.
I wouldn't be able to. It wouldn't have the same impact, right? Especially what he was around that time and like what The Shining and I don't. It- yeah, The Exorcist predates the first Batman,
Yes,
and a lot of the stuff that I'm familiar with Jack from. But I think The Shining was out before Batman. Not really sure on that one.
I can
Yeah.
find out, but it would just be weird. It's funny when you pull these up and you're looking at these actors who were also up for the roles of these parts, and you're thinking to yourself, how much would that change the movie's tone? And
So it's crazy though because if you think about it, the if you go back and watch films from the early 80s, even early 90s at this point, and you see actors in that film that you will now recognize as major big star actors, at that time, they were complete no names. Like, you know, they just were nobody. And it was their horror movies and or like their early like the 80s there's a whole genre. You're in high school, there's shenanigans, you have your outcast and whatnot. Christian Slater and Heathers,
Mm-hmm.
there was just a bunch of them, but that's where they just got their start in films that became cult classics. And now you go back and watch them and you're like, what the heck is that person doing there? How did they get so and so? Because the disconnect that this person is a $1 million actor at the time, that was probably like they were happy just to get a part.
yeah,
Yeah, I've noticed that in shows like the X Files. I'm going back and I'm like watching episodes of the X Files, and I think there's like one episode that's got like Ryan Reynolds in it. You know, he plays like a bully character who gets killed off in like the beginning of the episode, or like I think there was a whole episode with like Jack Black in it. Right? I think that was the which one was that one? The one with the kid who could control like electricity or something like that.
yeah,
But it's just weird. You go in and you start watching these shows, and you're like, wow, like he was in this show, and now he's doing these big blockbuster movies and whatnot. Now he had like a small part time role in X Files, and now he's Deadpool. You know, it's just this huge difference.
Yeah, Ryan even had enough power to actually get Deadpool made. Like
Hmm.
that's even crazier. You just get enough crowd support of like, no, 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 we can redo Wolverine 2, guys. Like, we're
Yeah.
gonna make this and convince a studio to make a franchise around you as an entity. That's that's a long
Mm,
way coming.
yeah, that's that Hollywood power right there.
Someday. No. I my joke is like, all right, as a writer, I'm just gonna wait for someday to throw my I'm gonna find a Netflix office and I'm just gonna like attach my books in like a binding and just yeet them into the office of like turn this into a Castlevania.
So, Exorcist is one of 5 horror movies to get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture.
Yeah, I do remember reading that.
One of 5. So you had Jaws in 75, Silence of the Lambs, The Sixth Sense, and Get Out. So from 99 to 2017, there wasn't a single horror movie that got nominated for Best Picture. And it's
Yeah, I can see that. I think for a lot of people, horror is harder to get into. I know, like when they do these awards for like best movie or best picture, whatever, half the time it's a movie I've never seen. It's a movie I have no interest in seeing. I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of used to watching schlocky horror films and just like B, B rank movies or
Oh,
whatever, and I
I
just
mean,
don't
like
have an interest in best picture.
why it got nominated and what like all the movies on that list I've definitely seen. But if you think about The Exorcist all the way back then, right? You mentioned this whole thing about the voice actor taking the shots of whiskey and having the priest there, and we know the cultural ethos behind it and how lines were still out the door. The acting and what they do in that film is so controversial, given the time period that the movie came out. Um, like it is culture defining for a whole segment of horror.
Yeah. Ravenfire has a question for Rick here. What is your favorite type of horror and why?
Beyond demonic possession and religious horror, which is why I picked that one. Ghost stories. I love stories about the dead with the heart pang and like that creepy element of the other worlds that you might go into, the purgatories, the limbos, the various parts. It comes up in all of my writings. I mean, heck, we just wrote an entire RPG tied to metal music and freaking the afterlife, right?
Hmm.
uh,
What happens when you die after you TPK your party?
yeah.
And uh, but so ghost stories to me, Wraith the Oblivion was my favorite role playing game of all time. I used to storytell that by candlelight, usually when I'm a dungeon master or a storyteller. My favorite game sessions were always like small handful of players by candlelight, the creepy setting, because I like that meaningful connection that something happened that they couldn't let go of, and they need to come there. Plus, because the really, I don't know the actress's name, but the girl with the really munchkiny voice from the Poltergeist terrified the crap out of me as a kid. And like, I actually grew up in the 80s when you had like the static TV that you would
Hmm.
turn on, like, right when like late night, the channels would actually go dark and it would just be the static
Yeah.
and like, yeah, yes, I love that stuff. It's great. Uh, so so even in the video games I play that scare me tend to be more in that vein of jump scares and psychological horror, um, less like less torture porn or body horror.
Hmm.
Splatterpunk doesn't scare me. Torture porn doesn't scare me. I will watch it. I find splatterpunk as a genre. Sometimes people call it as horror, but I find splatterpunk like Toxic Avengers and Killer Tomatoes of Outer Space and the absurd like Sharknadoes and whatnot. Like that's just fun, like ridiculous like popcorn flicks.
Hmm.
Um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't scare me in the slightest. I just think that slasher fix, most of the people in there are freaking stupid, which is why I loved Scream when they flipped that parody on their head because I grew up on that stuff. Nightmare on Elm Street was my favorite 80s horror movie series that I followed. I was a Freddy fan, not a Jason fan. So when Freddy vs. Jason came out, I was totally rooting for my man of nightmares and dreams. Also, because Robert Englund is an absolute gem of a person, and one of the nicest people that you could ever meet. And that also goes a long way with me towards like, am I gonna like super geek out about your franchise? Yes. Are you people cool? Awesome.
Yeah, I've I've noticed that a lot when because we've been I don't know how many years Jeremy's been going to PensCon, but I've been going to PensCon since it started. And when we go into like the celebrity areas and we're talking to the celebrities and whatnot, I always notice like the small screen guys who do like television shows and stuff like that. They always seem friendlier, more people person. You know, they'll sit there, talk, shake your hand. You know, and sometimes the kind of higher up people, they just don't seem like that. So it's always nice when you're seeing, you know, some of your favorite characters from like TV shows like Arrow or Flash or something like that, and you're like, I really like this character, and then you notice that the guy, especially like The Walking Dead, like
Mhm.
so far everyone that I've spoken to who was on that show, just some of the nicest people around, you know, and it always makes it better when you're going, oh, you're like my favorite character, and you're an amazing human being. So it's just,
So yeah, that's actually partly because of conventions.
mhm.
Uh, what had ended up happening, and this I know has nothing to do with The Exorcist, so I apologize for that. We're now going completely off into left field about convention culture
That's what we
and,
do
and
Every
creator
time.
stuff.
every time.
So uh, geeks sort of inherited the earth, sort of like around that like late 90s period when Magic the Gathering had finally actually taken over, and everybody at that point had played plenty of things. And a lot of conventions, the early fan cons that were out there, you would get what you would call a genre show. And so you'd get your actors from like Stargate, and you know you'd get your science fiction show actors to go to these conventions. Now these shows were popular, immensely so, for the audiences that were actually hyper into sci-fi channel and the other parts. But relatively speaking, they were functionally D-list actors in terms of like the Hollywood mindset. Well, what happened is because of going to conventions and fandom and the like lore that people had been putting in. Now, Star Trek had been doing this for a really long time. Star Trek had existed and around and had that element, but even Star Trek, as big as it was still often considered D-list. Now, William Shatner, well known for his Star Trek and whatnot, has gone to conventions ever since he started and all the way through. And there are people like him that bubbled up into these megastars, but they started off on genre spec fiction. Because we now get to go to conventions and meet people, um, these people are the same attendees like me. Like, I was a convention attendee, and then I started writing because I really loved writing. And then I flipped the tables. I never expected to be a guest at Pensacon, much less being invited as a literary guest. But then someday that happened. But I am a massive nerd who plays video games, League of Legends, grew up on all of this stuff like everybody else. I just happen to be weird enough that I chose to sit on down and keep writing day in and day out. Um, so but I'm the same kind of like people as them. So and everybody else, I will nerd out about everything. I'm nerding out with you guys about The Exorcist. Uh, but when you get somebody that comes to a convention, and I've seen this, that comes from out of left field, and usually there's one giant mouse empire that is the biggest sinner of this. They will bring and bubble up their own created guest and icon, and that person catapults into mega fame. And then they come to a convention, and they are a total jerk.
Mhm.
They do not want to be there. They do not want to sign autographs. They hate that they're contractually obligated to go do it for marketing. Um, versus the people who are thrilled to be at that convention and actually would have attended that convention prior to them ever being in media.
So, one actor at this past Pensacon that basically fits the mold of is one of the most humble actors no matter what fame he's at was Matthew Lillard at this last one.
Mm.
That man had more people coming to get stuff signed by him, but he spent at least a good 10 minutes with every guest that came up to talk to him. He hugged them, he signed whatever they wanted, like took pictures, like he didn't care. He wasn't there, he was there, yeah, obviously because he's contracted to be there, but it was more than that to him. It was a lot more than that to him. And even in his panel alone, like you could hear how appreciative of him he was about just being invited out and being able to spend that time with fans and get that connection.
So many voice actors I know. Carlos Ferro is the voice actor of Dom from Gears of War and like Da Vinci from Assassin's Creed and a bunch of other things. Absolute treasure of a human being. Like, you know, he himself was like, I'm a DJ, I'm a nerd, a goth, I love all these things, and just loves going out to actually like talk to people. But at Pensacon, my Pensacon star moment is Patrick Warburton. So I was voice of Kronk,
Yep.
and many other things. He was at Pensacon, and I was my first time being there as a guest, and they had these Baby Yoda shot glasses that were there for all of the guests, right? So Pensacon hooked up all these guests with these Baby Yoda shot glasses, and I go back into the guest room, and it's Florida hot. It is brutal. The convention was in July or no, June at the time because I think it was like coming just right off of COVID. And so everybody was outside waiting, and it was like just a nightmare outside. I walk back into the guest room, one of the break rooms, and I see Patrick Warburton holding all of the like 3 or 4 boxes of the Baby Yodas that were all meant for the guests of the convention. Looks at me. I look at him. He looks at me. I look at him. He's, you saw nothing. And he just runs out the door. And I found out later he ran around to the front line where everybody was waiting to get in conventions, and he was just like handing Baby Yodas out to people who were in line. But like that's awesome. I like that, like a national treasure. That guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like so.
So we had a question. This one's kind of directed to all three of us. So, is there a movie you have that is a guilty pleasure that you know it's bad, but you love it? Jason, would you like to take this one first?
I don't know. I don't have any like. I know like one of my guilty pleasure movies is The Fly. I like The Fly. I don't think it's a bad movie. I don't think anyone really considers it a bad movie, but I mean, there's just something about The Fly. And I actually went and I don't have it with me at the moment, but I actually went and bought like a whole collector set that's got like all the movies. I sat down and actually saw the Jeff Goldblum Fly on one of the streaming services a while back. I saw it and I was like, it's the first time I sat down and I was like, wow, this movie's amazing. I like this movie, and it does fall into that like body horror type of.
But that's a total like genetic like
Yeah,
fusion. What do you do with it? Like
it's like science horror.
yeah.
But yeah, I fell in love with that movie, and I think it was just the way it was written. And I actually went and watched the original one, and how campy it was, and I still loved it. But I
Wait,
was just like,
there's more. I only know the original campy one.
the Jeff Goldblum one?
Yeah, The Fly. Right? That's the original one, right?
No, they had a Vincent Price one. It's all black and white.
Oh crap! I didn't know about that.
Yeah, there's actually like 5 Fly movies altogether. There's the Vincent Price, and it had like 2 sequels, and then you had the Jeff Goldblum remake with its sequel, which was really bad. But yeah, so like I bought a whole collector set. It was amazing. But I mean, I like movies like Evil Dead. I just have a soft spot for Evil Dead. We ended up
Yeah, but Evil Dead cannot be counted as a bad film. All right,
no,
Evil
that's
Dead is exactly what it is. That does not count under guilty pleasure. That's on the checklist right next to Rocky Horror Picture Show. All right.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like the movies that I the first horror movie that I ever actually watched was Alien. That was like the first one for me.
The first
So
horror movie I ever watched was Gremlins.
Na, 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 na.
actually, you know what? I may no, I'm gonna stick with Alien. First one I ever watched was Alien.
Gremlins terrified me when I was a small 5-year-old kid, by the way. So that's why.
So, all right, Jeremy, your turn.
things popping out.
So, I don't have a horror movie that's a guilty pleasure. That's bad. I don't. But I do have a guilty pleasure of a movie that's bad and I love it. And it's The Room. Like, come on.
The Room is good.
It's so bad that it's good. Like, it's a terrible film,
Oh,
but
the Tommy Wiseau movie. Jeremy, that's horror in its own right.
the acting is horror in its own right.
I actually liked The Room.
Oh, I
now
love it. I love it.
I am now just finding out that apparently this is a bad movie. I thought this thing was a hidden gem.
No.
I love that movie. I watch it like
Jeremy-
once a month.
Jeremy loves this movie so much. He loves this movie so much that I've talked with my girlfriend about it. I'm like, you have to see this movie. You have to see this movie. But I cannot show you this movie because Jeremy will shun me because he has to show you. He's shown everyone this movie. So
Between that and like Tommy Wiseau's other movies, like it's just great.
all right, Jeremy, get a horror movie. Give us a favorite horror movie.
All right, let's
Gee.
see. So bad that it's good.
It doesn't have to be bad. It's a guilty pleasure. You like watching it.
Oh, Phantasm would probably take the cake on that one too.
Phantasm. Yeah, we just actually got off that series.
We did. Phantasm, like the series as a whole, like the first movie's good, and then they just started getting worse. But by the time you get to like Oblivion, it's like, what were we even thinking when we wrote this movie?
It is by far one of the most campiest things ever.
But Phantasm, the whole series, like Phantasm 4 and 5, they're bad, but I'll go back in after this and sit down and watch it and not care.
Nice.
Your turn, Rick.
All right. So can I have two?
Yeah,
Sure.
Go for it.
All right. So the first one that is absolutely hardcore. I have recently just watched this because it's actually timely. The original 1984 Super Mario Brothers movie, because that movie is a cyberpunk dystopia with Mario and Luigi, with like the evolution of dinosaurs and like this like crazy meteor shard plot. And everyone's like, that movie's so bad, and I'm like, yes, because you're thinking it's supposed to be a Mario movie. That's a cyberpunk film. Yes, that is
thing
it.
right here. I just bought this recently.
That thing right there is a cyberpunk movie, and I try right now. I'm on a quest to get everybody to go watch it because, like, obviously, I went and saw the new Mario Brothers movie, and I loved it. And I loved that there was even a toss back to that movie in the commercial that they did. But yeah, that is a guilty pleasure. I was like, that movie is so horrible. Why would you do that? And I'm like, no, it's great. Just it's not Mario. It's cyberpunk, and it's fantastic for its time. The other one that I found out that is apparently a very terrible film, even though to me it is near and dear to my heart. I have artwork of it. I have books of it. I have read all of the novels for it. But I tried to show my girlfriend this movie, and I was like, hey, we're going to watch one of my favorite movies of all time. And even on rewatching it, and I realized that it had been 20 years, and like I'm used to seeing it, but Vampire Hunter D, the original.
Okay.
The film cuts and the pacing in that movie do not hold up as anime. And Courtney's like, it's so boring. And I'm like, it's hand drawn. They hand drew this. There's no computer animation. They use skills and move things around. And like, it felt like watching it with her felt like 45 minutes of like just like this judgment, and I knew I was being judged for what was arguably an old one of the or like founding of anime films. And even I have to admit, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust is a vastly superior film, and Vampire Hunter D does not stand up to the test of time in the way that that director cut and pacing way. Animation wise, it's freaking beautiful.
All right, I got a question for you. Have you seen the movie Hereditary?
No,
No, you haven't seen Hereditary.
no, I
Okay.
haven't heard of
Well,
it.
you okay? We're just gonna skip the question then.
Okay.
No,
Uh,
it's fine. You should check it out. I only bring it up because one of the big and I don't know what other movies they do this with, but like when Hereditary was coming out, they were advertising it as like this generation's Exorcist, and it just kind of caught my attention. It was like, what makes it this generation's Exorcist? Is it because of the content of the movie? Is it because of the way? Because it is also like a demonic possession film. So I didn't know if it was just kind of like the way they were um, advertising it because it had the same content, or because as far as I'm aware, they don't have any sort of I haven't looked in to see if they had like any sort of tragic backstory that kind of ties in with like what happened during The Exorcist. I know there was this one incident where they had an advertisement for Hereditary. It wasn't out yet, but they had like theatrical trailers and whatnot. I think it was over in Australia or New Zealand or something, but they were doing like a an Easter special thing for like kids, and they were showing like Peter Rabbit or whatever it was at the time, and somehow the trailer got slipped into one of the trailers before Peter Rabbit, and it scared like all the kids. There's like a guy on fire, and there's just all this crazy stuff going on. It scared all the kids out of the theater or whatever. So I was like, it's interesting. And I watched it, and I thought it was pretty good, but I just I just didn't know if that was like a marketing tactic where they just go, "Oh, it's this generation's Exorcist." Scare you like that movie scared, that generation when it came out. So that was just
I'll,
it. That was-
I'll have to go check it out. At least, like, definitely, like, give it a good solid googling, and figure it out where I can watch it. So, just if it's a demonic possession horror movie, I'm
Mhm.
probably gonna want to watch it.
No, it's a bit slow paced. From what I can describe, it's like a roller coaster. Like the first, I'd say about first half of the movie is like just kind of that slow up crawl, like a roller coaster would have, and then once you hit the peak and you get this moment in the movie, and you'll know it when it gets there, but then like after that, it's just and it goes straight until you get to the very end of the movie. So it's very, it just does have a lot of slow build up. So which I actually kind of found with this movie is there seemed like in the beginning it just had kind of a slow build up until
Yep.
things got going, and that's always kind of the better movies. You
Yeah, I
just have
like
to
that stuff.
you just have to get through that slow moment at the beginning.
There's a whole thing about like storytelling horror and even writing horror, about like the ways to build that element, and then even cut in a little bit of comedy and brevity before you come back to that, the horror elements in order to ground the viewer or the participant, because when you're doing horror, you want to actually treat the audience as if they're actually engaged in it with you rather than
Hmm.
simply watching and or reading.
That makes a
Actually,
lot.
that's probably why I've been out there looking for horror movies that would scare me, and I haven't really found anything that like really scares me to the core. But when I play survival horror video games, I am easily wimped out. And
So I am.
I think that's because of an actual interactive, you take control of the character, you are that character instead of like just watching a movie and just watching stuff play
So
out.
that's why I like horror novels. That's why even as a storyteller for running horror games, and why like some of the elements you do, if you treat the person that is reading or consuming, they have to be a part of the story. And I do entire panels on like talking about how to like bring in that engagement. But when you talk about that participation thing, I am currently allowing myself, because I finished a project, to play a video game for a while, and I'm playing Diablo 4 on hardcore mode because it terrifies me. Because I know that any moment, if I die, that's it.
And you don't
Yeah.
have
Get
Black Ballad and
vengeance.
Diablo 4 to come back.
Yes, exactly.
Oh man, that's a good one. Well, and you know, when you were saying, Jason, like a marketing plight of how this movie treated audiences, like apparently some woman fainted and broke her jaw during the premiere of this movie, like when it was in theaters for the first time. She was in like, the day it came out, she went and saw it, and she fainted, fell forward, and broke her jaw in the chair in front of her, and then ended up suing Warner Brothers because of images that caused her to faint.
Wow.
Well, that's free advertising.
Yeah, I mean, she must have went down hard. I mean, maybe if you hit it in just the right angle, but
It's like we talked about at the beginning, like just the sheer controversy that came from this movie, and it still holds up to this day.
yeah, it is still
It's
it is still a good film to watch.
50
And
yeah,
I mean,
years
yeah.
old. 50
and
years
I mean,
old.
and it doesn't feel like it's aged. You know, you watch like a movie that came out a while back, and you're looking at it and you're going, "Wow, that, yeah." The special effects or the CGI or whatever, it just didn't age well. It looks just kind of ugh. This one, I didn't feel like it, this could have been like released today, and it would have
That's
been,
why.
you know.
That's also why I like certain stories about lore. They're timeless.
Hmm.
Uh, vampires, monsters, demons, ghost stories. These are stories told around campfires and a part of cultural ethos for a very, very, very long time. And I personally think that those stories never go out of date, no matter how many times you respin them.
Now, apparently they got a. I think when I was looking at some stuff for this, they got a new Exorcist movie coming out this year.
I know. To celebrate its like basically 50th year anniversary, I'm going to go watch it. Just like The Crow is coming out with a remake,
Yep.
and we talked about it prior to the podcast. But my favorite movie of all time is actually The Crow. I couldn't talk about it because it is not quite horror. It's like action and drama. But I just finished writing The Crow: Prayers of the Past, and like binge watched the entire series again. I watched the first Crow every Halloween. Like that's tradition for me. Every once a year I watch that film. And but I watched in preparation for writing. I reread all my graphic novels, the comics, the expanded lore, things like that. And then I watched all the movies, and I was like, oh, these are bad. But knowing that the Crow reboot is coming out, and everybody for a long time has been panning any attempt to remake the actual Crow, but knowing what's behind it and the people that are there and why it's being remade, um, I am really hopeful and looking forward for the movie to finish post production. So that's probably my most like anticipated movie coming out like next year.
Because they got, if I'm not mistaken, Bill Skarsgård's playing
Yep.
the main. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and I actually got to talk with the studio when I was writing Prayers of the Past, and like they read what I had written, and they were thrilled. And I am an old I if I could get tattoos, like I've signed stuff next to James O'Barr, and even when I was at a convention, I had to go home to pick up my like copies of my Crow stuff and bring it so he can sign it for me. Um, and but to be canonically approved is like a dream come true. Like that is it. I was like, this is ever. But talking to the film studio, they wanted every bit of like, no, we need to make sure that this is fitting the canon ethos universe of James O'Barr's creation. And so I I think it's this one I think could actually be a good Crow movie to introduce a whole new generation of people to that like tragic goth love story that cemented like many of us in the 90s.
So this one, is a remake.
Yes, it is
Okay.
it is actually closer to the graphic novel. Um,
No?
than, now, granted, I have to wait to see what comes out on the editing room floor, and
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what it's going to be like. But um, uh, the fact that they know who the Skull Cowboy is gives me hope.
It's always good when they bring up something that you're like, nobody knows. They're not going to do it, and then they bring it in, and you're like, okay, they actually read it. They
Yep.
actually kind of have an idea of what's going to happen. Is he going to be good?
Mm.
I don't know yet, but at least he's in there.
Yeah, like at least this is a thing.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, that's what you hope for when you know, basing stuff off of books or any of that type of stuff. You're just hoping that the people involved actually know what they're doing with the material and how well they know the material. You know, it kind of reminds me of that Halo series that came out on, what was it, Paramount? Was it
Paramount.
Paramount?
yes.
Yeah, they were, and apparently I had read some article that was talking about the guy who was running the whole thing. Didn't bother to play any of the Halo stuff. Didn't bother to do any sort of like research into it. So it was just kind of like, do I really want this guy doing something, you know, and doesn't know anything about the source material? He could just completely blow this up. Now, I've never seen the series personally, but you know, that
I
was
have.
just
It was definitely everything you would expect from that statement alone. I mean, like, you know, the people who are in the writers, you know, the people that you have working on the project, they should always be fans of the series.
Mhm.
Have you guys seen Voltron: Legendary Defender?
I've seen
uh
some of it.
The new Netflix, like the updated Netflix series that it came out. So Mitch Iverson is one of the writers on that project, and I had the pleasure of working with Mitch on another game that I was working on, along with Deborah Ann Wool, who's like, you know, in Daredevil and True Blood and things like that. They are legitimate nerds about the properties that they work on, to the point where they are like mega fans that are like trying to throw themselves on like things that they like, and that always comes through when you're like the writers and the people are actually fans of a property. I do a lot more original fiction, but I've started to finally dip my toes into licensed waters. But like, I'm always a mega fan of like, ooh, I'm gonna go like learn all about this stuff. Like, I can't wait to talk about stuff that I have coming out in like the next 2 years, because I am like, I grew up on this and I
mhm.
finally got to work on it.
Oh, that's awesome. So, at the end of every podcast, we like to play a little game with Jason and the fan and the people watching through Twitch and stuff like that, where we guess the IMDb rating and the Rotten Tomatoes rating for the movie that we watched, and see who can get close. We play Price is Right rules, so if you go over, you're out.
Okay,
So,
I will need one. Rotten Tomatoes is 1 0 to 100, right? Or is that
yep,
Metacritic? Okay, and
IMDb is 1 to 10, and then Rotten Tomatoes is 1 to 100. So, with The Exorcist, on a scale of 1 to 10 from IMDb, with 422,000 ratings, what do y'all think they did?
I'm gonna go with. I'm pretty sure.
Ravenfire
Rating.
says a 7.
I was gonna say a
I'm gonna
seven, but
I'm
she
gonna go
beat
with
me.
7 as well. But that was gonna be my guess for IMDb.
I'm gonna go with 7.5. I'm gonna cut it.
Alright. We'll give everyone a couple minutes to kind of jump get theirs. And PJ says it's an 8. And it's cool because I love the Rotten Tomatoes website. Like, it's so much fun to read some of these critics' reviews on some of these movies, and you're just like, did we watch the same movie? Like, Okay.
I mean that's the great thing about cinema and whatnot is that, or any property really, is that when you can see a movie, watch a TV show, read a book, and you can take one way out of it, and then someone else can get something entirely different out of it. So, that's just the fun about you know, all this geek stuff.
It is. So, with The Exorcist, the closest is PJ at an, with the rating being an 8.1 out of 10.
Okay.
So, PJ, you are the winner for round one.
She almost went over. Almost went over there.
So, Rotten Tomatoes. 1
Rotten
to
Tomatoes.
100.
Critic score wise, I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with an 87.
87.
Yeah, that might be kind of low though. Critics.
Critic score. I'm gonna go for. This is. It's gonna go one or two ways, but I'm gonna go for a 93.
Ooh. Yeah, see, I was thinking it was higher because I think critics really like this movie, or at least like the aspects of it. Because we've noticed that sometimes the critic score can be kind of low, and then like the fans are higher. But
So, one of the
I think-
Splat critic reviews, it says the film continually struggles to suggest through atmosphere what it promises, but fails to provide in substance.
Oh, that critic was clearly wrong.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
it didn't deliver anything. It was just girl floating and saying vulgar things. And that was it.
Richard
not
Combs watching the Father Merrin get like projectile vomited on by accident. Yeah, you're just wrong.
What's wrong?
So
That green vomit didn't look like what most people said it looked like pea soup.
Pea soup.
Yeah. Look, Ravenfire, when we were watching it, she actually said it looked more like paint. It had like a paint texture to it. It looked like it was real smooth and kind of. I'm like, actually, I can see that now.
It almost
like
looked
Kermit.
like the Nickelodeon slime.
Ah, yeah, the double dare slime that they would dump on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the second time. Like the first time when she does like the projectile vomit, that was kind of like an olive green kind of. Bleh.
So,
And then like
green is messed up. Remember, I don't know if you guys know this about me, but my day job is I used to be like an electrician, and I still do stuff with electrical, and I used to do like concert lighting. Side note, green is one of the weirdest colors to light if you have a green object, because you can change if you have a warm light or an off light. That thing will look all kinds of different shades, more than most other things. And with the way the film was shot, as pea soup, but they have riggers and like lighting technicians, and they didn't really have LEDs back then.
yeah.
Well, unfortunately, everybody busts. Raven was the closest. It was an 84.
84.
Certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, but it was an 84%.
By critics.
And now the audience
Wow.
score on a 1 to 100.
Okay,
Oh.
this one's definitely gonna be like I'm gonna go with a 92.
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with a 70. I'm going to think that people who are watching the film these days are going to be like, what the heck is this?
And that's the fun part about, like, you have to think about, like, people who watch it nowadays. Compared, like, the younger generation's going to look at it and be, oh, this isn't any good. Like, this isn't scary. Oh, this is old. Stuff like that. And like we were saying earlier, like, to me, it didn't age at all. But it could be just because, I love the genre so much that I don't see it as an aged movie.
No, this is I think at the time when this was coming out, this was kind of something that was big and it was controversial and it really hit something home. It wasn't something like people saw all the time in cinema and whatnot. I think nowadays just about anything comes out. Nothing really feels like it pushes the limits too much anymore. Because I think we've gone beyond the limits and we're not looking back. So I think a lot of stuff that goes, oh, this is like it's getting progressively more like um, just more outrageous. It feels like, at least to me, that's just what it feels like to me. It's just it feels like you have to keep pushing those boundaries further and further and further and further. And
I don't know. I think my take on that is Jordan Peele. I think is a godsend of a movie creator and director for his recent batch of horror movies
Mhm.
that have
Oh, yeah.
breathed something new into the genre that hasn't been seen in a very long time.
Yeah,
I agree
yeah.
with that.
I remember seeing we were doing a bunch of watching new horror movies, and I think like this was about the time Hereditary was out, and we actually saw we red boxed Get Out,
Mm.
and my mind was just blown. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, this is
I,
actually
I, but I think that like that movie and all of his subsequent films that he's come out with, even Nope, like they offer something different from a
Mhm.
different viewpoint and a different style that is pushing different boundaries, especially Get Out. Get Out
Mhm.
was absolutely hitting an entire cultural undertone
Mhm.
that was then, brought into horror in a fantastic way.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. But the audience for this movie was higher than the critics, and PJ wins it by getting it 1% off again at an 87.
But I said 87 on the critic, and now I'm
I took I took a gamble. I was wrong on all of them, and I'm totally okay with that because to me this movie's a 10 out of 10 on both sides.
yeah. This was definitely
It was amazing to watch again. I'm glad we got a chance to rewatch it when we did, especially with the new one getting ready to come out
Mm.
in October of this year.
yeah. I have to go and now watch the rest of the series.
So the
Do
nice
they
thing
have?
is, when this movie comes out in October, hopefully I will see you guys again next Pensacon, and then we can nerd out about the new Exorcist as well.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah. I actually, it was kind of funny speaking of Pensacon, because we actually went to the panel that you were at, talking about with all the horror literature and stuff like that.
Yeah, with Jonathan Mayberry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and me and Jeremy actually bailed out a little early so we can get over across town to see the Scream panel. But you guys are actually like the first panel that wasn't like big celebrity. Don't take that the wrong
Oh,
way or anything.
so
But
hold on. Jonathan Mayberry has like written 90% of the things that we've all grown up on. That guy is a former
yeah,
MMA behemoth author. He's where I want to be in 40 years, or 30 years, right?
hmm
So like I was up there freaking out that I'm on a panel next to the guy who created Black Panther and Namor.
hmm
Like, um, so like that was still crazy for me. Like, so we even have our own like, like I'm sitting there the whole time like, Jonathan.
but
I'm
but
sitting
yeah,
up here.
it was Jeremy's idea because he's like, he's been starting to get into writing and stuff. He's like, hey, just we got to check out this panel, and I'm like, okay, we'll check out the panel. And we actually sat there and we're listening, and it was actually really entertaining. It was very educational. It was by far one of the more interesting panels that we'd been in, and I did feel a little bad having to leave a little bit early to get to Scream, but Jeremy said he went down to the floor. What was it, on a Saturday? He went
Something
down to
like
the
that.
floor
Yeah.
and he got the book signatures and stuff he got from you, and you guys were down there talking for a while,
Yep.
and um,
Free
I
advertisement.
was yeah, there you go. So I was like, well, Sunday when I get a chance to get down to the floor, I'm gonna chat with him for a little while, and yeah, missed you then because you
Oh,
weren't. Yeah, didn't see you
yeah.
down there. So
I think because I had sold out of everything and I was then having to fly back out just due to like schedules. So like I was done. My Sunday went like the convention was fantastic. I can't wait to go. Hopefully this year when I'm down there, I should be having the third book in my trilogy out and finished by then. So I'm in the middle of writing that, like in between Black Ballad and all the other like storytelling things. But I really want to finish my third book because I'm already like really far into it. And there's actually somebody who's behind me right now working, playing some Diablo, that will murder me if I do not finish my third novel by the end of the year. And my publisher has actually given me a deadline, so I got to do it. But authors love doing panels, right? Because we're always behind. Nobody knows who we are, right? You see the things that we work on, but not that many people stick around to watch the credits to see, or even like flip open like especially licensed fiction. Star Wars for Star Wars, but not many people. It takes a while before people recognize Timothy Zahn as the creator of Thrawn. They just see Star Wars at first, and so it takes a bit in a genre before like an author becomes recognized by name, and that's why like one of the reasons I love going to conventions, because also I love talking about like storytelling in panels and like that nerd stuff.
I was gonna say it was your story that sold it for me. That was the best part of the panel.
The electrician story with the exploring the underworld of Chicago and you want to know what's funny is because you held up my books. The most terrifying thing that can ever happen to an author is not only when somebody grabs the books, but when somebody actually tells you, "Hey, by the way, I'm actually reading your book," because there's that weird sense of anticipation of like, do you like it? When somebody comes to you afterwards and says, "Hey, I read your book," you already know if they're coming to talk to you that they read your book, that they liked it, so you're clear to go. It's that first page opening of the horror moment for a writer of, I'm starting to read, and then you have to sit there and like wonder in abject horror for the next 2 weeks or whatever until somebody finishes reading it, and they're like, okay, all right, passed.
Oh yeah, no, I finished the first one. It's great. I haven't started the second one yet, but the first one was amazing. So
thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to get me a series going. I have to pick up the first book there, and you saw them on your website, right? You got I think I popped on there about a week after Pensacon. I was on their browser. I was like, ooh, wait, well, he's got these books on here. I want to get me one now. So
game side is now Storyteller's Forge. My website's going to stick around just for my own like novel series and stuff like that. So, but that's what I do. And if anybody is listening, like if you play D&D, like metal music and sarcastic fiction about the end of the world, check out Rick Heinz Writes or StorytellersForge.com, and I got you covered.
Sounds good.
It's great stuff, but that's all the time we got tonight. Rick, I want to thank you for coming. You were actually our first guest on the podcast, so we are extremely thankful that you took time out of your day to come join us. Thank you for the great movie suggestion.
Yeah, when Jeremy said that you were coming on here, Jeremy was like, "Hey, I got news for you." I went, "Yeah." He's like, "Remember Rick over at the convention?" I went, "Yeah." He's like, "He's gonna be on the podcast." I'm like, "Ah, sweet."
Yeah, totally. As soon as you guys get this up on YouTube and stuff, I'm gonna like share it around and put it in my like email blast. You invited me on a podcast to talk about The Exorcist and creepy stories, and it was amazing. So, like, I love this stuff. This is great. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. We'll definitely have you back.
Yep, definitely.
It'll be on YouTube tomorrow. By tomorrow, okay. I'll get it uploaded tonight.
I should come back after we watch The Exorcist, the new one.
Oh, definitely. We'll definitely have you back
maybe
for the
we'll
remake.
Yeah, we'll have to do that one. That'll be a good one. We can talk about how it improved or deproved one way or the other.
Well, we could have a whole different conversation that time. So
remember that last episode we did with The Exorcist? Those were good times.
Well, everybody, we will see y'all next week when we watch The Exorcist 2. See y'all next week, same time, same campfire. Everyone be safe. Have a great night.
Good night.
Four years ago, The Exorcist shocked the world. Now, the struggle between good and evil goes on. Exorcist 2, The Heretic. Linda Blair, Richard Burton, Louise Fletcher, Max von Sydow, James Earl Jones. Exorcist 2, The Heretic.